Okay, good afternoon. Are we ready to start? There are still some people coming.
Well, why don't we start with introductions?
We start. So who are you? I haven't met you before, Uli.
Yeah, welcome. My name is Uli Homann. I'm from Microsoft, out of the Cloud and AI Engineering team, and I've had the pleasure to work with Ralf and the Nestle team on this wonderful SAP journey to the cloud.
Yeah, and my name is Ralf Huebenthal. I work for Nestle. Not sure everybody knows who Nestle is. We are the biggest food and beverage company, roughly 350 factories around the world, a bit over 200,000 employees. I don't know, over 1,500 locations, and yeah, produce iconic brands like Purina, San Pellegrino, KitKat, except for the US, where it's produced by Hershey's, Nespresso, Nescafé, some of our brands we have in our portfolio.
And Adam Simpson, I'm in charge of the Azure platform towards Nestle for Microsoft.
Yeah. So here we are today talking about our journey to cloud, right? And that's a lot of people talking about SAP RISE. With our journey to cloud was actually quite the foundation for SAP RISE. So we started before SAP actually had a RISE contract. But as I said before, we own iconic brands like Nespresso. And I want to show you a little bit of the video, which tells also our story with two pretty good actors, which can do it much better than Uli and I ever could do it.
Oh, don't say that. Don't say that.
No, it doesn't want to change. It's coming.
Slow patience.
Slow patience.
What's that?
Espresso.
Is that coffee?
Yeah.
I want in.
Ready.
Is that coffee? Get ready to experience a cup above.
I want in. Espresso. What else?
So you may ask yourself, so what has that commercial to do with our journey to cloud? So if you go back to 2019, we were a little bit like Danny, yeah, like I was a lot shorter, and we were running 11 data centers around the world, and we wanted to go down really to 2. We had 24 terabyte instances running in this in our SAP Focus data center. We had another 3 data center, which we had a semi-cloud, a private cloud, which was run by one of our SIs. And we were looking at, so what do we do? Do we renew all these 11 data centers, or do we go to the cloud? And that on the back of that, we had tried SAP HEC for our BW, and it was a disaster, to be quite frankly. It was 5 years earlier or 6 years earlier. But we still thought, no, let's not reinvest into data centers again and really give that cloud thing a chance. So we worked with SAP and said, so how do we get that done? We have 24 terabyte nodes. We don't want to have bare metal anymore. We really want it fully virtualized. And so who can support us, giving us a 24 terabyte nights fully virtualized in the cloud, operated by SAP? And we went around, and there's more than one hyperscaler. But yeah, there is only hard to believe. But finally, we found Uli, and said, Uli, so how do we make it work? And then Uli said, I can do it. And maybe you tell us a bit of the journey for Microsoft to get to this 24 terabyte fully virtualized environment.
Yeah, it's interesting because we obviously started off with a bare metal environment called large instances. I don't know if some of you remember that. And at the time, Ralf and team said, nope, we don't want a bare metal. We don't want a special thing. We want to be fully in Azure as a normal system. And our team was already committed to getting to a M-class or M-series environment, which was that large, but it wasn't finished. And so we used effectively the SAP Nestle opportunity to really get the hypervisor to understand the 24 terabytes, to really put it into the production system. Because again, if you're putting an HPE Superdome into your environment where you normally have standard off-the-mill production systems or normal computers, and now you have this very specialized environment, it is a very different system that needs to be then operationalized in terms of how do you make it hardened, how do you make it robust, what happens when the machine fails, because these are ginormous machines with lots of memory, lots of virtual and physical CPUs, so you effectively have a very challenging environment. The great news was that both HPE as well as SAP wanted to make this work because Nestle was very, very hard and driving it, because they said if we move to the cloud, so if we want in, then we effectively want in all the way. And so we used it as an opportunity to really figure out the operational aspects of the thing. HP was a great partner. SAP invested in dev resources to work with us because, again, it was the first time that a hyperscaler tried to make this kind of system work in the cloud. So it was a really fantastic experience with lots of interesting opportunities to grow. Because again, when you start something completely new that nobody has ever done, including Intel, including HP, you effectively go and learn a lot. So it was a great opportunity. And as you can see, because Ralf is still smiling, we managed to go through. Or like I say, he still has a job at Nestle, let's say that way. Because if we hadn't figured it out together, I don't think we would have been here.
No, none of us would be here because, and we'll talk later about it again, how we drove it. And just to put some dimension behind it, so Nestle has a single template global since roughly 20 years, right? So we have one development track, and then we had 3 global instances.
And for a while, you were the largest SAP customer worldwide, I thought, right?
We still have the biggest cloud presence footprint and yeah, we are one of the top 3. It's always a bit of a competition between BMW and Apple and ourselves. It goes a bit back and forward who has the biggest instance in that case. But it was more than just the SAP instances, right? Because for us, I want to shut down these data centers. So we were roughly moving 1,500 terabytes into the cloud. I think also 1,500 servers in total we had to lift and shift into the cloud. And that was then also some of the challenges we faced, right? How do I sync my SAP Go Live with my complementary application setup? But we worked through that together and we went all in. We did Azure only because also we believed that was the only way we could get it done, right? If you then start with multiples and I want to keep that here and I do that here, you end up in a mess. It's already complex enough to do it the way we did it. Oops, wrong direction. Then we ended up we signed the contract, right? And then the time to change comes.
That was fun, by the way.
That was a lot of fun. I think one thing we drove right from the beginning to have this 3-way partnership. Yes, HP was in the background, but you were dealing with them. But we always, from day one, run it as a single team. So people like Scott Gaffrey, Christian Klein, my boss, who hasn't fired me, so which is good, so it worked. We were constantly in communication. We had executive steering comms. We worked very closely together because it was the first time doing that, which really helped us through the change journey. And the change journey wasn't smooth. Actually, the best thing what happened to us, our first go live, our first big box go live was our DSR environment. And we got it so wrong. We had to roll back. We had to go back to the business and say, mea culpa, yes, we wasted 8 hours of your downtime, but it doesn't work. So we rolled back, we reviewed our plans, and then actually we got it right. Actually, the failure was, in hindsight, a good thing. We still delivered on time and budget over this 2-year period. It was a challenging 2 years, more on the SAP side, because we told them we cannot have more than 10-hour business downtime. So we did a lift and shift, but it could not take longer than 10 hours. And I can tell you when we started, they came with 48 hours. And we kept on saying, no, 10, 10, 10. Eventually I said 8, 8, 8. So I didn't find that amusing. But in the end, actually, the fastest system we did took 6 hours, 42 minutes from our big SAP environments. But for us, it was a smooth journey, and that during COVID, and that also to highlight. All our meetings happened in teams. We had common all hands between Microsoft, the SAP team, and my team. We did it all virtually, and actually, funny enough, the first time we actually met was after we had done the last go live, because Christian Klein sponsored a barbecue in SAP for the whole team afterwards, as it was one of the biggest and most successful go lives for both companies. But Uli, how were the 2 years of change for you?
Well, it was interesting because obviously when you're doing something completely new that nobody has any experience to do, you have to work through a whole bunch of stuff. So what you now know as SAP RISE is obviously a business construct, but there's also a technology blueprint behind it. And we actually used Nestle to build that technology blueprint in terms of how do you do zonal awareness, how do you do multi-regions, all of the necessities in terms of really providing that mission-critical system was worked through that system, and again, virtually. Nobody at Microsoft was on campus either. So we were all doing this very complicated stuff with hypervisor changes and all sorts of other stuff remotely. And Ralf already mentioned the governance process. And governance always sounds like a dirty word because it's like a bunch of people kind of hanging out and kind of scrutinizing what the good people that do the work actually are doing. In this case, it was really necessary because it made sure that the various levels of decision making, we could actually go and get to a resolution very fast. As Ralf said, we made a couple of mistakes, or we had to change. Some of it was driven by Nestle because of some of the business changes they had to run, but a lot of this was actually driven also by technology. And we had to effectively make that alignment. And so Jürgen Thomas, which some of you might know, who is our SAP god, I think he knows SAP better than SAP by now because he has been in the business since 1996, supporting SAP or working with them. He was effectively working with the Nestle equivalent and the SAP equivalent at the engineering leadership level. And then you had myself, Ralf, making the intermediate decisions. And then you had Scott Guthrie, Chris, and Christian Klein effectively making the decisions at the larger level. And I have to say, this governance process was planned and executed by Nestle. And I have to give them real credit because it was very tight, but also flexible. Meaning it wasn't religious. If there had to be a change, it happened very quickly. And if there was a good reason for it, we figured out a path to figure out how to move the change into the plan. Because again, we learned everything was new. Nobody knew what they were doing. It was not something we had done 5 times, 10 times before. Everything was effectively brand new. And therefore, I give Ralf and team credit that they really understood that with these new things come unexpected complications. And you have to be able to deal with those and then figure out how to fit them in the plan. And as Ralf already said, he pushed SAP hard, SAP pushed us hard, and Nestle pushed us hard. So I think it's really hard because we were the guys underneath the infrastructure, and so we got it from both sides, and then we pushed some of the pressure down to HP because they were providing the hardware at the end of the day. But most of this was really in the Azure core because the hypervisor had to change, new Windows version had to be deployed, all that stuff, in order to make the 24 terabyte stuff work. So the governance was key, the learning was key, and flexibility was key. So if you want to take something away, plan really well, and have the flexibility to adjust your plan because you will run into issues. If you stick to the plan religiously, you will most likely run into trouble.
I think also one of the key items you mentioned was on the testing part. So to be able to get
Yes.
the windows down to the 10 to the 8 hours, testing beforehand was the important piece.
And let's come to the challenges, right? That was, for example, one of the challenges.
Yes.
We hadn't worked it all out, how pacemaker works, how the hypervisors work, right? And we had to do our dress rehearsals because one of the key things for the SAP guys was to practice, right? We were fighting for every minute. Yeah, we were going through all the tasks. I mean, there's a list 10,000 items or something you need to consider in your cutover procedures, the rollback, setting the triggers, and all this stuff you do with the near zero downtime tools. It requires practice, and you fight for every minute. But then you had a successful, and you hit 11 hours or 11 hours 30, and you're celebrating. And then Uli comes and says, sorry, we have to change something here. We have to do it again. Right? So that was a bit the journey where we were on, and that's where Uli said we always stayed flexible, right? And you had to stay pragmatic. It was new. So fully agree on the learning and a certain amount of flexibility and trust into the team and trust into the process. Especially when you're just the sponsor of this program, you need to have a lot of trust and surround yourself with the right people who drive it with the right attitude. But yeah, we did learn a lot along the journey, right? Like we had a few issues along the way. I remember the Europe go live. We had issues with the NIC cards. They didn't give us the throughput we needed, and we were really worried once we hand over the system to the business that they can actually run on it. Our Europe box with 24 terabyte is quite maxed out, right? And we did a lot of archiving so that we had enough space to put the hypervisor on it and pacemaker. But then the NIC cards didn't work. So, I mean, we were all sweating on it together with HP, with SAP. And the nice thing about the approach was all three, SAP, Microsoft, and Nestle, we got together on the phone and say, are we going live or are we not going live? And if one of us three would have said no, we wouldn't have gone live. So that's how we drove this partnership. I mean, huge learning curve on pacemaker, right?
Yes.
Post go live. You want to?
No, I'm not. I'm just going to smile on pacemaker.
Hey, we had a few critical business incidents because pacemaker got it wrong. Right, the system wasn't failing over. We had challenges with nodes not going into a weird stage and not automatically recovering or failing over. But the interesting part for us was, and we went through this learning curve. It took us roughly 6 months, until you have run in the system. It's a bit like a car, right? Sorry, and I don't speak in miles, but you usually don't drive your new car more than 100K, 120K for the first 100, 200 kilometers to make sure, it's everything oiled and works smoothly. And that was a bit the problem here as well. So we had a few business impacts in the beginning, but the benefit we got out of it clearly outweighed it. And actually, I always say to my team right now, I have this big ambition, and it's a moonshot, like when Kennedy said we're going to the moon before the end of the century. I said, okay, if you guys want me to retire, you give me 99.99% availability without the paycheck of a Swiss bank, or we saw, what was it, BlackRock this morning? BlackRock. They are in a different league when it comes to IT investments than a humble food company is. So we try to get there, and that really was a big part of it. Because if you look in our numbers since we've gone live, and there's more to it, we have actually reduced our critical incidents by 50% since we are on Azure.
Compared to your on-prem stuff.
Compared to our on-prem stuff. I can tell you stories. I just took this job, and we had double data center, everything double on-premise. But I took the job, and what happened here in the US, one data center from the telco provider had to shut down because they didn't maintain the air conditioning accordingly. And then the Arizona River went over, and we lost, I don't know how many mileage of cable, and they all had to be redone. So we were for 12 hours down in a fully redundant data center. When I'm now with Azure, we had outages, but they didn't impact us because we have data center zones, right? I go from 2 data centers to 2 data center zones, which gives me a minimum of 6 data centers, if I'm not mistaken. I have learned
It depends a little bit, but yes.
And we see the benefit of it. We see other huge benefits of having a fully virtualized environment. In the past, when we were running it, to fail over to the secondary system, it roughly took between 4 to 6 hours. Now we are below 5 minutes. So where in the past I would have gotten a priority 2 or 1 ticket that one of my regions can't operate anymore, users don't even raise the ticket anymore because they know, hey, it's back in a minute. So that helped us really to reduce the critical incidents. But we also, and interesting enough, speaking to other companies, we also reduced our time to resolve by roughly 40% year on year, where other companies reduce their tickets, but their time to resolve gets up because the tickets get more complicated. And that's also something we have been working on with Microsoft and SAP together. How can we do smarter monitoring? How can I use AI in my monitoring? And created something we call internal monitoring what matters. And we really start with the business outcome, right? So we look, can we produce? Can we ship? Can we pay our people? And can we sell? Right? This is our four key priorities where we start. And we have a nice dashboard where you can see what's going on. And then we really start clicking down all the way to the Azure instance to see, do we have an issue on there? And the latest initiative we're working on now together with Microsoft is building actually a co-pilot, ask what matters. So really where we want to go to the level is, hey, there's a little red dot. Why is there a red dot, right? So to speed up the resolution even further and to avoid issues for the business before they even arise. Yep. So that we ultimately achieve the 99.99% availability. Other things we worked on together as part of this, or aftermarket of this project, chat ops, right? We created a lot of Teams channels where we have the Microsoft guys, the SAP guys, and my team together in the same chat group. And it has become a bit of a competition. If anybody sees something, they're going straight away on, oh, have you seen that? Is there something wrong? Right? They really have picked up the pace between the three companies to avoid issues going forward.
Yeah. So although that'll never replace resiliency, at least it keeps the transparency, the communication as fast as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, so one other thing that Ralf and team are working with us on is really, you guys have heard about BRAIN? Yeah. So BRAIN was an internal initiative which was started to effectively get the telemetry out of our systems that we write a lot of. So if you think you have a big data problem, you don't. We have one that's in the hundreds of petabytes per day. And part of what we are doing is we effectively are using AI now to go and automatically detect if there is a failure or an issue in any of the services that are signed up for BRAIN. And then it's automatically shared and triggers the right action. For example, putting a notification into the portal is actually not done by a human anymore. It's actually done by this automated system called BRAIN. And one of the things we're doing with Ralf and team is to look at this Measure What Matters initiative, which is something that, again, Microsoft, lots of other partners that Ralf is working with, as well as SAP, are working to put telemetry data from our systems into a single system so we can really get to end-to-end credibility. And we are now looking to put the BRAIN system into it as well, so that there's intelligence that actually comes from our system understanding, meaning our telemetry looks at a very large swath. What we're doing with BRAIN is we're bringing it into context so that the SAP systems or instances that Nestle runs are effectively reviewed automatically as a contextualized item, and we can drive the necessary telemetry and messages into Ralf's system and don't overwhelm him with tons and tons of stuff that might or might not be relevant. So we are really reducing the number of information with intelligence so that his Measure What Matters becomes efficient and fast rather than being overwhelmed with tons and tons of data that you don't really need in order to determine the failure. Yeah. So that's one of the innovations we're driving together because as it turns out, end-to-end monitoring is another one of those. I've had now a couple of very large outages, not with my friend Ralf, where all of a sudden the on-premise system started to not be connected anymore because the cloud changed the IP address. All the cloud systems had no issue, but the local firewall and the local load balancer didn't get it. And so all of a sudden, none of the endpoints in the cloud were visible anymore. And so if you think about thinking an end-to-end system, don't just think cloud, think end-to-end, whatever that means in your scenario. And that's really what Ralf has been pushing for quite some time, as a partnership between all the vendors. And I think we did some pretty good work together to get there.
I mean, and it's key, right? What do we get challenged on when there is an issue, right? Every time I spoke to my boss and there was a P1, I said, oh, Chris, sorry, we have a P1. and looking after operations, I tell him that, or I used to tell him that quite often. His first answer is, what's the business impact, right? And this starting with your end-to-end, really starting from the business outcome perspective, and then only going down into the technology that makes all the difference, and it drives the resolution accordingly.
Yep.
I mean, one of the other lessons, and going back to the previous one slide, we have learned is look after your network when you do it, right? We created the CNF and all this stuff and the express route connections, but that's also something we paid a lot of learning money in the beginning, right? Because we didn't get right what is critical traffic, what's not critical traffic, what do I do via express route, what do I do over the normal channels. So if you start this program, make sure you have your network also sorted. Yeah, it's quite important.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good part because, again, it's not just the connectivity. Think about an express route. In general, you go over from your network to a telco network to the Microsoft network. So you have 3 network elements in there where the express route connects everything, but underneath the covers are 3 different providers. Yeah. And so thinking that through. And then not just the connection, but also the gear that connects all this stuff, firewalls and whatever you guys use. Is always a fun little exercise because on-prem, in general, it's fairly static. In the cloud, it's very dynamic. And making sure that these two reconcile is part of the learning, I would say, that we did.
And that's really where we saw the difference in the partnership working, right? Between Microsoft and Nestle, we were shaking relatively quickly hand. We didn't know the issue is there, but then if you have a telco, he is not necessarily as interested in a partnership, rather more in your pocket. The finger pointing goes left and right really quickly, right? So that's why partnership is important and something we really learned to bring in telcos and your network design, your network architecture early into the program and into the program design. That is a piece of advice. Before we, I think, hand over for questions.
I think you wanted to talk a little bit about futures, right?
I think what next?
What next?
What else and what next? Yeah.
What next? So obviously we spoke about the monitoring bit. This picture is not AI generated, by the way. I really had the pleasure to meet George Clooney and
had an espresso with him and stuff?
No, didn't have an espresso. It was really just a 1-minute handshake. But I have to say he's a great brand ambassador and really keeps us honest, especially when it comes to humanitarian and environmental work. Right? He has a huge interest and he keeps on challenging us. What else? So our next step is actually, and we took the approach of, and it's a learning when we went to HANA 1 or to the first version of HANA. We went to HANA. We changed data centers. We went from split architecture because when we started SAP as a single instance, there was no machine which was big enough to cope with our size. So we had 3 instances, a SOSBox, a COMBox, a FINBox. So we merged it to one into HANA, into a new data center, and to the S/FIN migration, which was a predecessor of S4. And again, it was a disaster. We cost Europe a lot of money in this case, had lots of outages. And we said, no, we're not doing that again. So what we did this time, we really just did a lift of shift. So we are on HANA and ECC. And now what we're doing is we're doing a brownfield upgrade to S4. And being in the cloud and being on Azure actually helps us in that approach and doing it this way. Because now I need to, again, spin up 24 terabyte instances to practice. Again, I get only 10 hours business downtime. The first estimation we got was 96 hours. And we had a good laugh and say, go back to the drawing board until you come with something realistic. But that helps us a lot because now we can quickly say, Uli, give us another 2 boxes so we can practice, right? Today we have done 8 test runs of the migration. We're getting close to the 10 hours. We are much better shape than during the first upgrade. But yeah, that helps us a lot. We do a lot of work when it comes to Azure with FinOps, and I was really pleased to see some of the announcements this morning, which I think will help us to drive FinOps much more efficient. We're doing a lot of work together also with Microsoft on GreenOps. So we have 2 guys in my team. They're really just focusing on how can I show, if you put this application onto Azure, what the impact is, the greenhouse footprint is, and do you actually really need this application? is it that important? Yeah, not only showing what it costs them, but also what's the impacts they have on the environment.
Yep.
Yeah, or if they don't want to retire the application, and you have 1 or 2 users are still using it, and you really still need it? Yeah, or if you need it, do you really need it 24 hours, 7 days a week? Can we run it in a different mode? So this is the journey what's coming up ahead for us.
Yeah, so the other piece I heard you're very pushy getting into is edge and factories and stuff like that.
So you want to talk about that?
Well, of course I want to talk about it because it's something that a lot of folks, I'm sure, are also looking into, saying, okay, we're centralizing on RISE. We're going to S/4HANA, which is a centralized system, but I still have distributed environments out there, potentially, let's say, factories. And what's the perspective there?
So look, the challenge Nestle has with the factories, right? We are not somewhere in the fancy cities. We are where the farmers are, so in the middle of nowhere. And creating connectivity is not always that easy. Right?
You've heard about Starlink though, right?
Yeah, I've heard about Starlink, but I can tell you I have factories in West Africa, and only in Nigeria you're allowed to have Starlink on the roof. Actually, we have a massive, the biggest Nescafe factory in North and South America, or in the world, is actually in Mexico, where we are using Starlink. But still, it not always can keep with the reduced load we are having. So really, we're working now with Microsoft and with SAP together on the factory of the future, on our edge environment. How can I bring Azure to the edge? How can I bring ARC to the edge? How can I run SAP on the edge, right? You have either MII or now DMC, as a digital manufacturing cloud, right? Which we still want to keep on-premise, because with our locations, you won't get the connectivity as solid, right? So having the ability to run on the edge for 24, 48, or whatever hours it takes is quite important. And to put it in context, we have factories where I have only 8 minutes downtime. Yeah, when I have more than 8 minutes downtime, I have to throw away roughly 2.5 million worth of raw packaging material. Because we can't reuse it.
Yes.
The 8 minutes downtime are driven by the space I have on the line. Because if I can't store pallets anymore and I can't put them away, I'm in trouble. And as space gets more and more dense, resiliency is a really, really, really hot topic for us. And looking into ARC. And
so that's why we, for ARC and IoT operations, we actually moved to 72 hours of what we call intermittent connectivity, because it's not connected, it's just not connected right now. And it takes 72 hours, or we give it 72 hours. In our experience so far, and again, Ralf can correct me, 72 hours, if you're really down that long and you're not a submarine, something is very, very broken.
Yes.
And you're beyond your recovery phase anyway. And that means for us, we will test it for 72 hours. If you run longer, that works just fine. It's the reconnect event that's going to be the fun one in terms of when the systems come back online and you are connected, what data you're going to send from that edge environment into the cloud for processing. And if you have heard about a problem called queue length, queue length is effectively when data gets queued, and we do that when we're offline. And if the queue gets too long and we keep on shoving more data in it, you can't catch up. So there's no way that you reduce the queue to 0 again. And therefore, you need to make a decision. What are you going to do with that data? So you need to effectively cut it, the null device, or archive it, or whatever you're doing. And that's something that, again, requires thought as when you move into an edge model, which means there's connectivity by default, but you want resilience and robustness locally for a period of time, whatever that period of time is in your given situation.
Yeah, but we had outages longer than 72 hours, like when on the, if you look at Africa.
Yes, I'm sure.
On the Egyptian side, some rebels blew up some undersea cables. On the other side, you had an earthquake. And then West Africa was isolated and roughly took 2 weeks to recover it completely to a workable mode. So when you're in challenging locations, it's really the edge downtime. 72 hours is usually enough, right? Until then, we get usually things fixed again. Even with the worst locations we are. But yeah, it is an ongoing challenge, and having that edge environment with 72 hours, and also for us is important as we go through it, we want to have RISE support also on the edge environment, so we don't want another partner in there. We're really interested in this three-way partnership between SAP and Microsoft, so that Microsoft also, SAP also supports us on the edge environment based on Azure technology, which they have certified.
That's what we're doing with the distributed manufacturing cloud. Dominic and his team are working with us since quite some time to get to this edge-based model where you have RISE process in the cloud and RISE process at the edge that can again survive for a period of time. And again, the period of time is the key piece of work that I see going forward for us.
Yeah. Good.
Do you want to open up for questions?
Yes.
Sure.
Yep. Any questions from the room?
Yes.
Can you go in the microphone, please?
Yeah.
Because the people on the stream cannot hear you.
Thank you for sharing your journey to RISE on the 24 terabytes. Can you share a little more on your in-region HA architecture and your DR architecture, to reach the 4.9 reliability?
Oh God. Where is Laura? The lady in the picture, she's actually the brain.
But you're pretty and that's why you're here.
Exactly.
Okay.
I look more like George. At least my middle name is George, so I think that's the only thing we have in common. So we have 2 data center zones in each region, right? And then our development track is a single track, right? And we replicate and sync back to the 3 regional tracks quite frequently. So we bring them and sync always, imports all. So we always have one master build available should really the worst case scenario happening, right? Obviously we do backup, in-region backup, or transfer the backup out of the data zone region into another zone, have it sitting there. But if you need to consider where we were before, right? We had 2 data centers, not 2 data center zones. So our resiliency has gone up quite heavily. Yeah? And for now, I'm not too concerned to go to other zone so that I can restore or have another multi-region setup. I don't think that's warrant for now. But we actively working on out of data center zone backup location. Yeah. And it becomes prohibitive expensive, right? Let's be clear on it. If I would create a third zone or would in a different region, that's, yeah.
Again, RISE by default is multi-zones, so active-passive, because the HANA architecture is a single leading database environment. And they do have a multi-region option, but the failover region is effectively a failover region. So you have to really go a failover and then restart the whole thing. The active-passive nodes, as far as I know, it's a fairly fast failover. So if you're going from one zone to the other, because we have a zonal issue, that's fairly fast. What did you say, 5 minutes?
5 minutes, yeah.
And but the multi-region one is a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And so most customers so far, when we have an issue or they have an issue, they're kind of like, let's see how fast we can recover before we start the DR process. Yeah. Because it's a DR process, not a active-active model.
Yeah.
One piece of advice for customers getting started on a RISE adoption journey, from your perspective.
From my perspective, look, and we've talked to a lot of different companies on that one, right? I believe we got it right by doing first the lift and shift into RISE. But I believe many try to do too much at the same time, right? Get into the cloud, get the support, and then you're in a much better position to practice and get your journey to S4 right? Because that's what we are chasing. Everybody wants to be on S4 by 2030 or 2027, depending on in which situation you are, before you are end of support. But unless you do a greenfield, do it piece by piece. The other thing, as I said before, what I believe we got wrong was the network bit, right? I'm doing actually right now in parallel also a massive network change. Yeah, we're going from a single worldwide global provider to a multi-provider strategy and really treating the network much more as software than rather a piece of cable. So look after your network. Don't do too much at once. Unless you do greenfield, do your lift and shift first and then do the upgrade. Or do you upgrade first on-prem, depending on the end of your life cycle, and then do your lift and shift? But don't do both at the same time. I'm still tarnished from this European HANA experience. We didn't have didn't have much sleep. We had many sleepless nights during this time. So get the pace right. And the last point is really create that partnership. Right? We were the first, so we got the attention of Scott and Christian Klein, also I guess because of our size with SAP. But whatever team you get from Microsoft and from SAP, treat it as one team. That makes such a difference. And even today now for our brownfield migration, actually on Friday we have our next steering com. And okay, we have one more SI in there like IBM because they play a critical role for us. But we're still coming together. We still have a single all hands for everybody. Our executive steering comms. There is the only thing we don't share with our partners is actually budgets. Yeah. But the rest, when it comes to technical issues, to business process issues, we are sharing. We are an absolute open book. We're working together on that one. Yep. And that really puts you on the right path to be successful. Finger pointing doesn't work in a change of that scale.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add, which is nothing to do with the Nestle journey or something like that, but you mentioned it before. You've been running a global template for a long time. Yep. And I assume that the global template is as close to the SAP standard as you can possibly make it. I hope. Yeah. Because that is the other guidance that I would give to anybody who's putting an ERP system in place. Stick to the standard if you can. Yeah. Because as soon as you customize, you're in for a fun journey. Yeah. Look,
we are in a lucky position that in '99 we had a CEO who says, I believe we should have standard business processes across Nestle, right? And then created a single template environment. So for us, actually going to S4 is really because we have to do it. And then obviously we want to get the possibility of using Copilot and Joule together, right? But we can't really give a solid business case because we have a standard template. We have shared service centers around the world. So we are so standardized that there was very little business case to start off with. Now with Joule and Copilot, the world has changed, right? We have a potentially bigger business case, but we have to do it, yeah. And then the clean core discussion SAP throws at you. I mean, in the end, it's also a mentality thing, right? You should, through your software life cycle, you should set yourself a target. When do I want to have the clean core? You can't have it on day one. You developed that code for good reasons because SAP had nothing available. Steampunk or embedded extendability and BDP came a whole lot later, right? And start pushing in this direction over time. So really set also up your clean core strategy in parallel. So that helps you a lot as well.
Any other questions?
There is one more person.
Oh. There's one more
person. So sometimes when we're building infrastructure, we set something up a certain way because we can't always see very far into the future. Yeah. And is there anything that you set up a certain way that later down the road you were like, we really shouldn't have gone that route because we didn't really consider X, Y, Z was going to happen in the future?
I don't want to sound arrogant, but no, not really. We're actually quite good where we are, right? When it comes to other SAP environment, it was a key focus, but also when it comes to the rest of the cloud application, right? And we did calculated things wrong, right? Like, for example, we oversized our environment quite heavily, especially when it came to all these complementary apps, because we didn't know how it was behaving. But if you move your treasury application or something like that, you want to be sure you have oversized it and you have space to grow. And really what helped us then, especially with the complementary application, was going really quickly to FinOps practices. Right? In the first years, we double-digit millions we reduced by introducing FinOps practices and getting it right. But yeah, if you go in and do this lift and shift of your complete data center, allow for a year to two to get your final consumption and processor and storage needs right. Yeah. Yep. Also think about what you move into the cloud, right? And what you can archive and where can you archive it to, right? A lot of stuff was also lift and shifted where I said, okay, you should have archived it straight away. Yep. Yeah.
Application portfolio analysis is something that should be done on a continuous basis anyway. But when you move to the cloud, if that's a new thing for you, it's an awesome opportunity to get rid of the dead wood. And Microsoft, when we moved to the cloud long time ago, one of the things our team did is they archived VMs or physical machines, didn't move them, but didn't delete them. And if nobody whined, perfect. If somebody whined, where's my application, then they would say, okay, so you are the only user of this thing. Really? And so there was a lot of conversation like that. But if there was a business need, obviously we put the machine back up. But we effectively played dirty pool with a bunch of people because we effectively said, nope, the application is gone. And they're like, whoa. And if they really didn't whine that much, we moved forward. Because sometimes IT people are too nice to their users. There's one person that uses it, and that's it. Yeah. And that's super expensive, complicated, and stuff like that. So,
I mean, and that was a big learning curve for the business, right? Because like I said, we had a lot of application where you had a single user or two users, and in the past it was just a box in the data center. They don't have to pay anything. Now they pay by application, by usage. So go on people's pocket, and they will reduce.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
I think we're done. Maybe
we are out of time, but really appreciate everybody coming.
Thank you
very much, and I hope this helped you a little bit on your journey to the cloud with SAP and Microsoft.